So welcome to Thinking West Great Books Explored, where we dive deep into the greatest works of all time through either some monologue forms where I go through each work in detail, but we also talk about books in general, the different book sets out there, say Harvard Classics, the great books of the Western world, and there are more to come, like the Reader's Digest series. But anyway, subscribe and study the great books along with us, and consider supporting us at ThinkingWest.com to help keep us reading and studying these great books and spreading the good news of these great books. This episode is a review of the Harvard Classics set, one of the first and still popular classic book sets out there. So the Harvard Classics set was originally called Dr. Eliot's 5-foot shelf of books because it was made by a man named Dr. Eliot, who intended it to fit about 5 feet of space on a bookshelf. And he more or less accomplished that goal in 1909 to 1910. He completed about 25 volumes in 1909 and the other half the year later. And this Charles W. Eliot was the president of Harvard University and hence came up with the name the Harvard Classics. Now, the purpose of this set, I'm going to quote from Charles Eliot himself, something he wrote in a promotional pamphlet called 15 Minutes a Day, a Reading Plan. He wrote, quote, "My aim was not to select the best 50 or best 100 books in the world, but to give in 23,000 pages or thereabouts a picture of the progress of the human race within historical times, so far as that progress can be depicted in books." End quote. He goes on to then explain that it's not necessarily the best books ever, whatever that might mean. It's going to vary from person to person, of course. But instead, he's crafting a set of books to provide what he refers to as a liberal education. His task was to, quote, "provide the means of obtaining such knowledge of ancient and modern literature as seemed essential to the 20th century idea of a cultivated man. The best acquisition of a cultivated man is a liberal frame of mind or way of thinking. But there must be added to that possession acquaintance with the prodigious store of recorded discoveries, experiences, and reflections which humanity in its intermittent and irregular progress from barbarism to civilization has acquired and laid up." End quote. Now, covering this book set is very difficult, at least from the aesthetics point of view, because there are a slew of different prints, especially in the first 10 years or so. And from my experience of looking at eBay and other online bookstores like thrift books, these earlier editions are pretty hard to come by. In fact, I've never heard of most of them. These editions range from Cambridge editions to alumni editions, Renaissance editions, Southward editions, etc. So if you have any of those, my guess is you probably have a little bit rare type of edition, and it would be well over 110 years now, so it might be worth a little bit more depending on the condition. But nonetheless, I'm going to be looking at more common versions that are floating around today because those versions, those editions, like the Cambridge editions, I don't believe were printed beyond that first decade or so. So we're going to look at actually four versions I have on hand here now. I just acquired a fourth version, which is exciting. I have these four types here on hand, and so I'm going to be first covering the aesthetics of these editions, followed by the general content spanned by the Harvard Classics, and specifically in comparison or contrast to the Great Books of the Western World set, which I covered in a previous video. And because there are four different types, I'm not going to go through every single one in detail, but I'm going to cover some of the common features of all of them. So anyway, I'll show a brief preview of all of them. Here are four editions that I have. I don't have the complete set. In all four editions, I do have almost complete in the red. I have about four in the green, and the other two brown editions, I just have a few floating around, so of some random works. But generally, I have here, this is called some sort of registered edition, printed in the 60s. This brown one, I believe, is called the Collector's Edition. This dark brownish red one here, third in line, is I actually don't know if this type of edition is named, but the green one is called the Deluxe Edition. So you'll likely to find some combination of these, say in your local bookstore or in a library. In fact, this red Continental Drama that I bought in the Deluxe Edition, Edition Deluxe. Okay, so actually, I made a mistake. This is actually called Edition Deluxe, but if you look on the inside, it's also called the registered edition. So that just adds to the confusion, and my actual new conclusion is that the names of the editions don't really mean much. Anyway, enough complaining. Most of these books generally have the same types of features aesthetically, with all the differences being merely between colors and whether they have gilded pages or what type of design they have on the front. In all those regards, they might differ a little bit, but the larger features are generally the same. They're all kind of a generic cardboard type hardcover as far as I've come across. They all have some form of gold foil stamped on the front covers, and some will have it on the back. This particular edition, whatever it might be called, it's a 1965-56 edition printing. This does not have anything on the back, has gold foil stamped on the front, no gilded pages, and no included book ribbon. So this makes it one of the more vanilla editions. But hey, I got at least most of a full set going for a decent price, so I'll take what I can get. The next edition, it's called the Collector's Edition. Again, we've learned this almost means nothing. You really just have to look at the year it's printed in and more detailed information about that. But anyway, this one comes with gold foil stamped on the front. It's on more of a dark brown background that kind of resembles leather, but I'm pretty sure it's not real leather, and I don't think it's what you would call leatherette either, but it has that appearance. This also has nothing on the back. It has gold foil stamped along the edge, which I missed with the previous edition. Similar features, but this one has a little bit bolder look. You can see the Harvard Classics a little bit more clearly on it, and because it's got some distinct black background where it says Harvard Classics there, and just overall different designs. That's just really all it comes down to. This particular edition does have the gold gilded edges along the page, which always looks a little bit nicer, and it has a gold ribbon included to keep your place conveniently, because that's important. The next version, this one actually I believe does not have a name, at least anywhere visibly printed. But in my opinion, this is perhaps the nicest version of the Harvard Classics, at least that I possess. So whatever it is will go unnamed, but I'm going to call it the Bumpy Spine. I'm going to call it the Bumpy Spine version because it's the only version of the book that I have that has these raised bands on the spine. And raised bands is the true name for that feature. And it's merely aesthetic. It doesn't really impart any usefulness as far as I can tell. But besides that, it has gold foil stamped along the spine as well as on the front cover and the back cover. So it's already distinguishing itself a little bit more. It has a single red ribbon. I believe it's only one. And then it also has the gold gilded edges. So it really has all of the, say, fine features you would look for in a nice hardcover book. And last but not least, we have the green deluxe version. This one actually, when you look it up online, will often appear black, but it is indeed a dark green, if you cannot tell from my very poor lighting right here. But it has this kind of shield that says Veritas, or Truth, on the front, and that's all gold foil stamped. It has similar features along the spine. This one does not have the gold gilded edges, nor does it have a ribbon to keep your place with. But it is one of the most common editions out there, and you're probably going to come across this one the most, at least in my experience when I was hunting for these books. That was the most common version I found. And no matter where you look, well, I take that back. It does matter tremendously where you look, but generally if you're going to look online at the major book retailers like Thrift Books, Amazon, or eBay, you're going to find these editions generally range in between, say, $5 at a minimum. If you're lucky, you might get a couple $4 versions, but they can range up to, say, $10. I would say around 7 or 8 would be quite average, at least in 2021. But I bought some in 2020 as well, so the prices were about the same. It's all just going to come down to the particular seller and what they think they can get for them. The only last things to cover in aesthetics would be what's on the inside. Well, most of them do not have artwork. Outside of the original artwork, especially in the scientific works, as I was very kindly corrected on my last video with the Great Books of the Western World set. Now, the Harvard Classics do include a couple extra images or pictures. So, for example, in the American Historical Documents, the title page also includes this picture of, I guess, many of the founding fathers at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So that, of course, was not a picture that was included with those documents pertaining to the American founding documents, but was added by the editors for aesthetic appeal. But again, the original scientific works will generally have the pictures that were put there in the original works by the authors. And you'll also find in some of these, the title pages tend to have some artwork involved, just lining the pages with nice pictures. And generally what you're going to find in each of these is black and white text, and really of just a very moderately sized font size. So whereas in the Great Books of the Western World set, I emphasize that its biggest drawback is really its absolutely minuscule font size, the Harvard Classics does not generally have that problem and has a very readable, very legible font. We can also cover a little bit more of the interior. They're all single column text, which is nice. Again, the Great Books of the Western World set likes to put them in a double column format, which is why they have very small font sizes. And then each volume ranges in the area of about, say, 400 pages per volume, and each volume can have multiple authors represented. For example, in famous prefaces, these are generally short works, but it's a lot of short, say, speeches and things. And in continental drama, you're of course going to get more than just one single playwright. You're going to get quite many authors represented there. Now I can move on to the content, and I'd first like to give a shout out to David Milliern. Don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he runs a blog, I believe, called Milliern, where he put out a huge expose on the differences between the Harvard Classics and the Great Books of the Western World, which are, in my opinion, probably the two most famous classic book sets of the 20th century. But he put out a lot of detail there, which I've drawn upon and kind of summarized and added to with my own thoughts on ThinkingWest.com and in this video. So I'll, just a quick shout out to him. You go check out his site if you really want the nitty-gritty details, and all the way down to comparing the numbers of how many books fall into science or how many fall into philosophy for each of these book sets. So you can provide a very quantitative comparison between them. But I'm just going to generally give you the results of some of his work and some of my observations. So this Harvard Classic set leans heavily toward literature and poetry rather than philosophy and science, which is more in the domain of the Great Books of the Western World set. And while I say that, yes, there are differences in the numbers of books that are in, say, literature and poetry than in philosophy and science, in the Harvard Classics, both sets represent quite a wide range of both all of these categories. So you're not going to go wrong. You're not going to be completely devoid of any education in any of those areas by choosing one over the other. But just know that if you do favor literature and poetry and plays and that sort of thing, you're going to probably favor the Harvard Classics set over the Great Books of the Western World. And if you're more like me, I'm more of a philosophy and science kind of person. That's where my background lies. I tend to generally favor the content of the Great Books of the Western World, which is going to have a little bit more representation in those areas of hard philosophy and the sciences, such as things like the founders of electricity and the founders of thermodynamics, things like that. So in the description below, I'll put links to both the full listings of the Harvard Classic set and the Great Books of the Western World set. So if you want to base your decision off content, you can check out those links and find out which works are presented in each. Also link to David's article, which is very helpful for comparing the content between the two sets. Harvard Classics may actually abridge some of the works in some cases where the works were, say, too long for the editor's likings, or just needed to fit within the form factor provided by the size and number of pages of the volumes. So actually I just picked out the two versions of Plutarch's Lives that I have here, one from the Harvard Classics in red, and the other from the Great Books. And you can already see there's actually a significant size difference in the physical layout of the two books. And that's coupled couple that knowledge with the fact that this is single column and a reasonable font size, while the Great Books of the Western World is a double column and absolutely minuscule, Bible-like font size, I might say. And that will give you the idea of, yeah, the Harvard Classics certainly abridged it and does not contain all the lives of the noble Grecians and Romans. Now, I don't know how far that abridgment may pervade the works in the set. I suspect it's not too bad, since Plutarch's Lives is quite long if you take it in its totality. But just be aware that some of the works will be abridged. So some of the extra features that are included are author biographies that are written by the editors of the Harvard Classics set, and these are included in the beginning of each work called introductory notes. They introduce both the work and the author that is presented in the volume. The Harvard Classics also includes a year-long reading plan, which is not really meant to be a serious dive into reading through the Harvard Classics. Of course, to do that in a year would be quite a feat, and of course the average person is not going to be able to do that. It's more of a light reading, almost like a devotional style of reading, where you pick it up. It tells you what some passage or a few pages to read at a time, and you'd go through those each day for about a year. So it's not going to be a comprehensive reading plan there. Now, volume 50 is a reader's guide, and this particular volume overviews the history, religion, philosophy, education, science, politics, voyages and travels, a criticism of literature and the fine arts, drama, biographies and letters, essays, poetry and prose fiction. So it covers a lot, but these are kind of short, 20-page or so expositions on each of those topics, and it also contains an index for the set as well, which can be very useful when trying to track down specific ideas. There is a bonus volume to the Harvard Classics, which is called Lectures. This contains 60 original lectures summarizing the fields spanned by the set on all subjects. A lot of these were Harvard professors, though not all of them at the time. And each of these lectures spends about 40 pages on each of the major subject areas, so that might be a good way to get introduced to a specific area that you might be unfamiliar with before diving into all the works that kind of comprise that field of study. So the language is going to be as you expect. It's going to be early 20th century, since that's when the editors worked on this. So it's going to be slightly tougher for some more modern readers that aren't used to it. But this is also, this is always a good thing, because iron is sharpened by something harder than itself, so we become smarter and better readers by reading tougher texts. And I think overall, people will find that after reading a lot of these works, you will get used to the language and become a better reader for it. Lastly, let's make a brief note on how do you get your hands on this Harvard Classics set after 100 years of being in print? Well, I don't think these are being printed actively, at least not under the Harvard Classics name, but you can find existing printings on eBay, thrift books, used bookstores, libraries. Anywhere where there are books, you have a decent chance of finding a Harvard Classics volume floating around. You're not going to find the whole set just sitting there nicely for you on the bookshelf, but you're going to have to probably turn to the online retailers for that. So for a full set of the Harvard Classics, the prices can range dramatically based on the condition, when they were printed, and just generally how well taken care of they have been for 20, 30, 50, 100 years that they've been around, depending on the printing. They can range from $200 to well over $1,000 plus for a whole set, or even just most of a set, but this depends on condition and edition. Generally, as I said already, I think they're about $5 minimum per book. But I will say there are certain places you can go, like the Friends of the Library organizations at many public libraries in some states. There I've been able to find volumes floating around, and actually I found over a dozen at one time, each for $2. And so that's why I pick up random editions of the Harvard Classics and other books, because whenever I find $2 for such a high quality book as the Harvard Classics are, or the Great Books of the Western World, I pick them up. That said, you can pretty much read most of the Harvard Classics set online for free. Now, while I'm very much a believer in physical books over staring at screens all day, as most of us do anyway, you can read most of these online. I believe by the Gutenberg project, which I'll also put a link. I'll always keep that link down there because I don't want you to have to spend money if you don't have to. And if you don't mind reading them online, you can find most of the works there, as well as other places. So the Harvard Classics overall is a fantastic choice for any home library, and you really can't go wrong. If you're choosing between this book set and the great books of the Western world, I'll probably put up a future video just on that topic, and to really compare them in a little bit more detail. But you can't go wrong choosing either set or many of the other sets out there, which we'll get to, like Reader's Digest or the Franklin Library or Easton Press. We'll talk about all those in due time, but get your hands on whatever you can and start reading them. So if you like this video, you found this useful, please subscribe and like and do all the other things that help promote the channel and help promote these great books in a time so desperately needed. See us over at ThinkingWest.com. Feel free to donate if you can. And see a link to the list of the works included in the Harvard Classic sets that'll take you to the website ThinkingWest.com. Also check out the monologue episodes that cover the great books in detail. I've already covered Plato's Apology and Crito. Phaedo is in the works. More is coming. It just takes a little bit of time to read and digest all these works, and then make videos on them, of course. So, without delaying any further, until next time, read on.